What kind of adult will he become? Today, my grandchild Matthew injured an underclassman at school. But he doesn't seem to be remorseful at all. He acts purely on his emotions and has no idea how to control his anger. At this rate, he might end up doing something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I was looking down at him. I could hear his faint breathing. I watched him sleeping with a peaceful and innocent expression, looking so adorable. Suddenly, I became aware of the cold knife in my right hand, and my heart froze. Staring at the sharp blade, thoughts of wanting to free him from his suffering raced through my mind. Clenching my teeth, I gripped my wrist, holding the knife tightly with my other hand. Love, hate, sadness, so many emotions mixed together, and I didn't know what to do anymore. Trying desperately to calm my trembling body and erratic breathing, I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore." I raised the knife above Matthew with both hands. "This is the only way. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My name is Mary. Now, I live with just my husband Jason. Jason is about to retire soon, so he always finishes work on time. We eat dinner together leisurely at home and go for walks together on weekends, enjoying peaceful days. We are both healthy, our house is paid off, and our children are independent. During this time, I never doubted that my old age would be positive and fulfilling. My daughter Rebecca works in fashion and travels for work frequently, both domestically and mainly to Europe, working very hard. She decided when she was young that she wouldn't get married. It's not a matter of being strong-willed. I truly respect her, who lives with pride in her work. On the other hand, my son Kevin has been living in the neighboring town since he got married at the age of 28. Kevin and his wife Nicole didn't have children for about 10 years after they got married. It seemed that Nicole was more troubled by this than Kevin was. "I don't think children are something to rush, it'll happen eventually." Sometimes, when they visited us, Kevin would bring up the topic of not having children. He spoke as if it were someone else's problem. There was no need to mention it himself. But if they hadn't had children for 10 years, maybe they were being asked about it by others. Jason and I pretended not to be particularly interested. As long as they were happy together, that was enough. "Nicole is always telling me not to drink or stay up late. She's like my mom, it's annoying." Nicole would smile shyly and look down next to Kevin. Not drinking and not staying up late, I felt like Nicole's wishes were embedded in those words, even if Kevin didn't notice. 10 years must have felt long. The day Kevin and Nicole told us they were expecting a baby. When was that, I wonder? Kevin and Nicole used to visit us once a month, but suddenly they stopped coming over, and I felt a bit uneasy. When they finally visited again after a few months, Kevin seemed embarrassed, so I thought something was up. "Well, Nicole is pregnant. Finally." Nicole's belly wasn't very big yet, so she didn't look like she was in the stable period of pregnancy. But seeing Nicole's gentle and kind smile as she lovingly patted her belly, I couldn't help but cry. "What's wrong, Mary?" "No, it's just strange. It's not like I'm sad. I'm happy. I really am happy." Once again, I repeated in my heart that I was happy. I couldn't put it into words, but I was truly glad that Nicole was having a baby. The look on her face as she rubbed her belly was the happiest I'd ever seen her, and I had a feeling I'd never forget that expression for the rest of my life. The 2 babies born were named Matthew. I felt deep in my heart that the name Matthew suited my beloved grandchild's smiling face. Nicole's parents lived far away, so she decided to stay with us for a while instead of going back to her own home. It had been a long time since I held a baby, and the sensation was so soft that it scared me to hold him. I let out a small cry as I held the fragile life in my arms and gazed at Matthew's expression. "You raised me and my sister just fine, so why are you so scared to hold him?" "Well, it's different when it's someone else's child. The thought of even accidentally hurting him scares me," I said with a nervous laugh, using every bit of my strength to support him with my arms. The tension was entirely different from when I raised Kevin and Rebecca. Sleeping in my arms, Matthew was fragile, delicate, and yet so beautiful. He grew steadily. When he turned 4, he developed a great love for encyclopedias and would devour the books he borrowed from the library. Kevin would always proudly report this to us. "At this rate, he'll probably become a scholar or something. He can follow any path he loves. As long as he's happy, that's all that matters," Nicole said, smiling at young Matthew. As I watched her profile, I wished from the bottom of my heart that this happiness would last forever. One day, the phone rang. Jason, having retired, spent most of his days at home with no particular hobbies, so he quickly answered the phone when it rang. "Hello?" Jason answered warily, suspecting a scam or telemarketing call. I was watching TV. It was an ordinary day. Holding the receiver to his ear, Jason quietly looked at me, and even though our eyes met, he continued to stare at me without looking away. From his lifeless eyes, I sensed that something terribly bad had happened. The call that came on an ordinary day informed us that Nicole and Matthew had been in an accident and were taken to the hospital. They were apparently on their way home from kindergarten. I imagined Nicole talking to Matthew, holding hands as they walked home. Maybe discussing what to have for dinner or planning to do some drawing at home. They approached the crosswalk, checked the signal, and started to cross. It was all in my imagination, but it felt incredibly real. A car driven by someone who had fallen asleep at the wheel. The two of them being thrown into the air. The moment they hit the ground, Nicole instinctively cradled Matthew's head. Jason and I, having received the call from Kevin, went to the hospital where they were taken and sat silently in the waiting room. The image of Nicole and Matthew being hit by a car replayed in my mind over and over again, and I covered my face many times. Why did this have to happen? Eventually, the doctor told us that Nicole had died. Kevin was speechless, standing motionless in the stark hallway with a fixed expression. Only Matthew survived, but there was a possibility of him having a traumatic brain injury, but it seemed Kevin didn't hear the doctor's words at all. When I took Jason's hand, he too was staring into space with his mouth slightly open. Before the feeling of sadness could well up, the funeral arrangements began to proceed. When Nicole's funeral ended, Kevin asked if I could take Matthew in. "I'm sorry, just for a little while. With Nicole gone, I just need some time alone to think." While you're thinking alone, what about Matthew's feelings? I couldn't bring myself to ask that as Kevin seemed so downhearted. Matthew, diagnosed with a brain injury, had lost his previously calm demeanor and had become prone to outbursts and violence. At first, I thought the sadness and loneliness of losing Nicole had changed Matthew's personality, but it might not be that simple. Matthew's brain injury had caused cognitive dysfunction, and none of us, Jason, Kevin, or I could understand him. He would yell, break furniture, throw things, and sometimes even hit me. Kevin and Jason would observe from a distance, frowning, and then leave the house to avoid the situation. My worries continued until Matthew exhausted himself and fell asleep after his outbursts. During these difficult days, only Rebecca, who lived far away, called me every day to check on me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm overseas now, but I'll definitely visit when I get back to the States." Hearing Rebecca's voice softened my heart a bit. I am of an age where society calls me elderly. Living with a young and violent grandson was mentally and physically exhausting. Days like a storm with Matthew continued, and the start of elementary school was approaching. During kindergarten, Matthew caused problems with his violence and harsh words, and I kept apologizing repeatedly. I wondered if I had ever apologized so much in my life. At first, everyone spoke sympathetic words, but gradually, people began to avoid Matthew and me. Even the moms who had been Nicole's friends started to avoid us, deepening our isolation. The kindergarten teachers made various accommodations, but Matthew, unable to move his body as freely as the other children, was always frustrated. When I went to pick him up from kindergarten, He would watch an active boy balancing on the balance beams. The boy, with his handsome face, would balance confidently on the beams, clapping and laughing with his friends. "Grandma, watch me." Matthew tried hard to balance. No matter how many times he tried, he kept falling. Seeing this, the confident boy began to mimic him. The boy pretended to fall from the balance beams as a joke. The boy who had effortlessly balanced earlier now mimicked Matthew's movements and laughed with his friends. Eventually, losing interest in Matthew, the boys laughed and moved on to other playground equipment with their friends. Matthew, with tears welling up in his eyes, "Grandma, watch me," he said, hitting me in the stomach. Sometimes, Matthew's violence extended to other children. I told Kevin that it might be better for him to attend a special education class in elementary school. But Kevin, and even Jason, opposed the idea. "Matthew has some hysterical moments, but he doesn't need a special education class." Special education is for kids with disabilities, right? I don't know. Is he that bad? Cognitive dysfunction is not easily noticeable. Kevin and Jason don't seem to understand the severity of the situation since they spend so little time with him. I've repeatedly explained how his outbursts cause trouble for those around him, and more importantly, how much pain he himself is in. But they refuse to accept it. It seems to me that they close their eyes to the fact that their beloved grandson, their son, sweet Matthew, is disabled. As time went on, Matthew's violent behavior became more severe as he grew. Even though bruises appeared on my arms and thighs, Kevin and Jason turned a blind eye. I even tried to seek help from social services to address this situation. But when I approached them, they insisted that the father must come to the office. Kevin showed no understanding of his disability and probably didn't even know the term high-functioning autism. Every day, I received calls from the school and apologized to countless people. Days when no one would help me. Matthew was always irritated, pulling my hair and continuing his violent actions. I was extremely exhausted. I was so drained that I even lost the desire to seek help from anyone. One day, when Matthew was in 4th grade, he seriously injured an underclassman at school. I heard the details from his homeroom teacher. Apparently, Matthew pushed the younger boy while climbing the stairs. Other students witnessed the incident, confirming that it was indeed Matthew's doing. Even when I asked Matthew for his reasoning, he couldn't explain, and the teacher was at a loss as well. I immediately rushed to apologize to the injured child's home. I rang the doorbell and, seeing the parents' faces, I apologized repeatedly. The boy had suffered a broken bone. At the doorway, "Why didn't the child or his parent come along?" the injured boy's parent yelled at me. The boy, with tears streaming down his face, "It hurt so much. I was so scared," accused me. I kept apologizing over and over. The boy's father said, "Why is a kid like that in a regular class?" Those words pierced my heart, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Back at home, I cooked dinner in the kitchen. While making his favorite vegetable soup, I cut the carrots into small pieces for easier eating. Matthew, clumsily holding the spoon, tried to eat the finished soup. The spoon fell from his hand multiple times, and eventually, in his frustration, he threw the spoon at me. Feeling an emotion that was neither anger nor sadness, I handed Matthew a new spoon and quietly looked at his face. What kind of adult will he become? Even if he hurts someone, he doesn't seem to reflect on his actions. He acts purely on his emotions and doesn't know how to control his anger. If this continues, Matthew might end up doing something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I looked down at Matthew. I heard his faint breathing, staring at Matthew's peaceful and innocent face as he slept. I suddenly felt the coldness of the knife I was holding in my right hand. As I gazed at the sharp blade, thoughts of wanting to free Matthew from his suffering raced through my mind. I clenched my teeth and tightly gripped my wrist with my free hand, holding the knife. Filled with mixed emotions of affection, hatred, and sadness. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Trying to calm my trembling body and ragged breathing, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. Holding the knife with both hands, I raised it above Matthew. This is the only way. I have no other choice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hey! What are you doing, Mary?
Suddenly, Jason burst into the room, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of the knife in my hand. I froze, turning to face Jason. Jason, terrified by the unexpected scene, stood motionless at the doorway, staring at me with wide eyes. My hand trembled, and doubt began to fill my heart. It must have been only a few seconds. Kevin, appearing behind Jason, rushed past him with a desperate look and threw himself over Matthew. If I lowered the knife now, I would stab Kevin. Kevin's face twisted in fear as he looked at me. Mom, please, stop. Matthew, who had just woken up, looked around in confusion, his eyes wide with shock. He didn't say a word, just stared at me silently through the gap in Kevin's body. I wondered how I looked in Matthew's eyes right now. Seeing Matthew's unusually clear eyes brought me back to my senses. I slowly placed the knife on the floor and left the room without saying a word. My body felt incredibly heavy. Oh, why does my body feel so heavy? In the living room, I picked up my smartphone and called the police. My heart was crushed by despair and regret. I wanted someone to punish me for what I was about to do, for the terrible thing I almost did. If no one stopped me now, I felt I would repeat the same mistake again. The police officer who answered asked what was wrong. I couldn't say anything, just watched the hands of the clock on the wall move.
Mary, hang up the phone.
Jason followed me, looking at me with a pained expression. I lost my strength, letting the smartphone fall from my ear as tears streamed down my face. It's okay, Mary. Nothing happened. Isn't that enough? Tears fell from my eyes, landing at my feet. Staring at the spots where my tears hit the floor, I mustered the strength to put the smartphone back to my ear. I tried to hurt my grandchild. I'm so sorry. I lifted my face. Jason, in front of me, looked like he was about to cry. If you were going to make that face, I wish you had noticed sooner. Jason walked up to me and hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "It's not too late. Tell the police it was a mistake." Jason murmured in pain. I pushed away from Jason's chest and forced a smile. I didn't need a mirror to know. I was surely smiling horribly. No. If you and Kevin hadn't come, I would have. A few minutes later, several police officers arrived at the house and I was arrested. As I was taken away in the police car, I kept my eyes closed. Reflecting deeply on my crime, I remembered his eyes looking at me. Remembering his innocent eyes, tears began to flow from the corners of my closed eyes. At the police station, I was taken to a room where a young female officer asked me questions. The questioning continued for days, and I talked in as much detail as possible. Feeling the weight of my guilt, I even wished to be sent to prison. The officer listened intently with a sympathetic expression. When I struggled to find words, "It's okay, take it slow," she gently said. An unexpected lawyer came to visit me, earnestly listening to my life story. "It's all right. I can stay in prison for the rest of my life." The lawyer gave me a slightly troubled smile. He advised me not to forget that there are people who are desperately trying to defend me. I tried to hurt my grandson. My feelings at that time were not just a momentary lapse. If I return to life with Matthew, it will surely happen again someday. After spending 3 days in the detention center, I was to return home. Rebecca was waiting in the police station parking lot. I was surprised that my guardian was Rebecca instead of Jason or Kevin, but I was genuinely glad it was her. I was also surprised that Rebecca, who was supposed to be living abroad, had returned, but she immediately ran to me and hugged me tightly when she saw me. "Mom, it was tough, wasn't it? But it's okay now." "Rebecca, what about your job?" "Don't worry about that. It's not important." Rebecca's warmth was so gentle that I lost my words, overwhelmed with emotion. Without saying anything or asking anything, she put me in the passenger seat and drove off without mentioning the destination. After driving for a while, a huge lake that looked like the sea spread out before us. The blue, clear lake reflected the surrounding mountains, creating a mystical atmosphere. Many trees were planted along the roadside, forming a long, continuous row. That night, I asked Dad and Kevin to check on you.
What?
Rebecca adjusted her sunglasses with one hand on the steering wheel. The reflection of the sun on the lake's surface was blinding, so I stopped looking ahead and gazed at Rebecca's profile. I used to talk to Rebecca almost every day. I also talked to Rebecca on the phone that night, but I don't remember what we talked about. But I'm sure I must have expressed my frustration with my current life. Life with him was reaching its limit. Matthew had grown to a point where I couldn't control him on my own. If Matthew continues to grow like this, he might become irredeemable. Then, maybe, perhaps I confided in Rebecca, who was living abroad and couldn't do anything about it. That day, you didn't seem like yourself. You seemed cornered and helpless. That night, Matthew had injured a kid at school. I was made to realize again how much trouble we were causing others. The sad eyes of the injured boy and the resentful looks from his parents. No one was blaming him. Instead, it felt like I was continuously blaming myself for not raising him properly. It's my fault. Nicole is gone. I have to be Matthew's mother.
Mom, you're not his mother.
Rebecca kept her eyes on the road as she declared this. Eventually, the car slowly came to a stop, and Rebecca gently placed her hand on mine, which was resting on my lap. You're not Matthew's parent. You don't have to push yourself this hard. But I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, Mom, but I wish you had relied on me more. Even with her sunglasses on, I could tell Rebecca was crying. There's no way I could rely on you. I couldn't. But Rebecca, who was supposed to be working abroad, had dropped everything and come to be with me. I was so happy that I choked up. Thank you. And whispered. It didn't matter where the car was headed anymore. My heart was so full that I felt sleepy and closed my eyes quietly. I found out later that neither Jason nor Kevin knew I was taking care of Matthew all by myself. During the police investigation, Jason said, I thought Kevin was helping. And Kevin, I assumed Dad was with him, explained. Both of them had been avoiding the responsibility of dealing with Matthew, leaving it to each other. Rebecca was apparently furious. After the incident, I started living in the apartment Rebecca had arranged for me. A few months after the incident, when I met Jason and Kevin for the first time in a while, they tearfully expressed their regret. Mary, I'm so sorry. We left Matthew's care all to you. Me too. I should have been a father, but I was stuck grieving for Nicole. I'm really sorry. Their sadness wasn't just from regret. The incident had made it into the local newspapers. Neighbors were interviewed on TV, and our family became the center of attention for a while. The school, considering Matthew's situation, strongly suggested transferring him to a special education class. Jason and Kevin had always been against the idea, but the persuasion from numerous school officials led to the change. At first, Matthew himself was unhappy about being singled out, but now he has adjusted and is living more peacefully than before. Jason and Kevin were sternly advised by their company to pay more attention to their family, and are now almost forced to leave work on time. Matthew wasn't present at this meeting. When I asked about it, Kevin smiled slightly. Nicole's parents moved nearby after the incident. They're taking care of him now. If Kevin and I took care of him alone, it would have been so tough. He would get angry and hit us. We're really grateful to Nicole's parents. They genuinely seemed thankful, but I couldn't help but think that if they'd realized it sooner and helped me, things might have been different. As I was thinking this, Jason and Kevin both apologized again. We're truly sorry. If you ever feel ready, maybe we could try again. I covered my ears at those words. I still didn't have the courage to face Matthew. When I think back to that night, my hands start to tremble. His peaceful sleeping face and the cold feel of the knife. And those young eyes peeking from between Kevin's arms as he tried to protect Matthew. He might not understand yet what I intended to do that night. There was a prolonged silence as everyone seemed to forget how to speak. Rebecca gently placed her hand on my shoulder and stroked it softly.
Mom, Dad, and Kevin haven't forgotten all you've done for the family. Take your time. Rest now.
Rebecca.
Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. What's important is that we learn and grow from them. Don't you think?
Encouraged by Rebecca, Jason and Kevin nodded emphatically. Maybe if I had been more open about my struggles with the family from the beginning, things wouldn't have turned out this way. From now on, let's make sure we talk things through properly, not just about Matthew, but about me, and everyone else too.
Don't worry, Mom, you can do it.
Rebecca's smile was so bright that I couldn't help but smile back. Considering my situation and Matthew's feelings, my sentence was suspended. Sometimes, I cook. When they were young, Rebecca and Kevin loved my fried chicken and ate lots of it. The fried chicken, passed through Rebecca, reached Matthew, who was overjoyed to eat it.
If I try harder, I can see Grandma, right?
Now, Matthew is undergoing appropriate rehabilitation under expert guidance so that he can live well despite his physical limitations. He couldn't play sports like other kids or climb stairs as quickly as them. It's those little things that no one notices that I think really hurt Matthew and caused him distress. He is moving forward too. Tomorrow will surely be a better day than today. Life is a battle with difficulties. Everyone faces obstacles and hardships they can't avoid. Getting understanding and cooperation from those around us is not something that's impossible. There are always people who will be on your side, definitely. No matter how much you want to run away, if someone is there to worry with you, that alone could be enough to save you. After finishing the fried chicken and thoroughly cleaning the kitchen with a cloth, I suddenly remember his smile. If he smiles while eating the fried chicken I made, I am happy. Imagining the day we can all live together again, I quietly close my eyes for now. Tomorrow is my brother's funeral, but my husband Joseph said he wouldn't come. Moreover, he even bragged that the barbecue with his colleagues was more important than the funeral.
Make sure the house is clean and stock up on beer and snacks for tomorrow.
He ordered me, but I had already gone back to my parents' house to prepare for the funeral, so I ignored him. The next morning, the phone rang loudly.
Today is the day my colleagues are coming over. Get back here right now. Don't forget the beer and snacks.
That unreasonable call came from Joseph. I sighed deeply and replied,
Got it.
Then I explained the situation, left the funeral, and rushed to the house still in my morning attire. As soon as they saw me, his colleagues were astonished. Immediately, Joseph faced their criticism. My name is Amanda. I'm currently 30 years old and work in an office. I got married at 27, and Joseph had asked me to focus solely on the house once we were married. I had always dreamed of quitting my job when I got married, so I readily agreed and left my company to become a housewife. At first, I dedicated myself to housework from morning till night for Joseph, who worked outside. Joseph also praised my efforts at home. Amanda, it's great to have you at home. I get to eat warm meals and the house is always clean. This is the life I've always dreamed of. Joseph had grown up in a dual-income household and craved the warmth of a home. His mom worked night shifts, so they had a life of constant missed connections. He wasn't particularly close to his dad either, so he moved out after graduating high school and getting a job. Someone should always be at home. Seeing Joseph's happy face every day made me want to do my best for him. But that life didn't last long. Shortly after we got married, we built a big house and bought a car, taking on a huge loan.
No matter how many times I look over the budget, we're going to go bankrupt like this. I think I should at least get a part-time job.
Joseph had asked me to quit and be a housewife, so I did without much thought, but I started feeling it was too soon. Wanting a more comfortable life, I suggested I get a part-time job.
What? Are you saying my income alone isn't enough? Sorry for the low salary. You should try saving more.
I casually suggested taking on a part-time job, but it only made him angrier. I tried to explain that I didn't mean it that way, but Joseph's anger didn't subside.
Why do I only get one piece of toast for breakfast from you, a housewife? You can't even manage a proper breakfast because you're not a morning person and you think you can handle a part-time job? If you start working part-time, dinner will quickly become frozen meals. And don't even start talking about sharing household chores equally just because we're a dual-income couple. I'm not doing any housework.
I wouldn't say that, and I won't slack off. Joseph compared me to his in-laws. Joseph's mom had a night job and was probably too busy to make Joseph a proper meal. I tried to reassure Joseph to ease his worries. Don't worry, I won't slack off on the housework. Plus, if I work, it will reduce your burden too, and we'll both have an easier time. Joseph thought for a moment and then said,
All right, you can go part-time after you can handle all the housework perfectly. But make sure you save money while doing it.
I agreed to his conditions, and our life together started anew with a fresh mindset. Joseph became more meticulous than ever.
Hey, the mirror is dirty. You'd be a burden if you went out to work like this.
Any small mistake would result in him calling me over for a lecture. Each time, I apologized and tried my best not to repeat the mistake.
Hey, I just said to save money, not to make crappy meals.
Joseph's tone grew harsher, and he began to be more aggressive towards me. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. And could you please speak a little more kindly? I wanted the kind Joseph from before to return. But my plea backfired.
Huh? You're the one who wanted to go part-time, and now you're complaining about how I'm checking up on you? Are you saying you don't want to go part-time after all? How irresponsible.
No, that's not it. I just want you to be more mindful of how you say things. I was frustrated that I couldn't convey my feelings to Joseph. Never mind, forget it. Joseph must be tired from work and didn't have the patience to listen to me. I decided to talk about it again another day.
If you have something to say, just say it clearly. Don't talk about wanting to work and then behave like a spoiled kid.
Joseph scratched his head and ordered.
Anyway, we're out of beer. Go buy 3 more bottles. The supermarket should still be open.
Wait, we agreed on 1 bottle a day. If I buy more now, we won't be saving any money. I was in charge of managing the household finances and thought we couldn't afford to buy that much beer. Joseph became visibly upset.
Huh? Are you saying we can't afford it because my earnings are too low? You just need to get better at saving money.
As he pushed me out the door, urging me to hurry and buy the beer, I reluctantly decided to go to the supermarket. From that point on, Joseph seemed to believe that if he ordered me around in a commanding tone, I would obey without question, and his demeanor became increasingly harsh.
Hey!
He eventually stopped calling me by my name altogether. He probably forgot that I had started working part-time, keeping track of my paychecks. I found myself having to cater to Joseph's moods every day. During this time, I received a call from my parents. It was news that my brother Stephen had passed away.
No way! Stephen?
My parents, sobbing, begged me to come home immediately. Since it was the middle of the day on a weekday, I called Joseph, but he didn't answer because he was at work. So I left a note and prepared dinner for the evening before leaving the house. When I arrived at the hospital they had mentioned, I rushed to my parents' side and saw Stephen resting peacefully on the bed. In that moment, tears streamed down my face. The reality of Stephen's death hit me all at once, and I cried with my parents. Soon after, we met with the funeral director and began making arrangements for Stephen's wake and funeral. As night fell, we decided to return to my parents' house to rest and prepare for the funeral the next day. When I went back to my room to rest and checked my mobile phone, I found numerous missed calls from Joseph. Joseph had known Stephen, and I was sure he was in disbelief. I assumed Joseph would attend the funeral, so I prepared the details and called him back. "Hello, Joseph? Did you see the note I left?" I spoke in a voice meant to offer comfort, expecting him to be either shocked or crying. To my surprise, he was furious.
"Hey, what's that all about?"
I thought he was turning his grief into anger, trying to cope. I gently responded, "Yes, I know it's sudden and shocking. I'm still trying to process it all myself." Before I could finish, Joseph interrupted me.
"What do you mean, you'll be gone for 2 or 3 days? You better come home every day to do the chores." "What?"
I was stunned by his words. Despite my disbelief and being overwhelmed by Stephen's death, I told Joseph he must come and then ended the call. However, Joseph did not attend the wake. To avoid worrying my parents, I lied and said Joseph was busy but would come to the funeral. Yet, after the wake, he called and said something outrageous.
"Tomorrow, I promised my coworkers we'd have a barbecue in the afternoon. How am I supposed to invite them to a dirty house? Get back here and clean now." "What? Tomorrow is Stephen's funeral. You didn't come to the wake, so please attend the funeral."
I was shocked that Joseph ignored what I had written in the note about the funeral. When I mentioned the funeral, Joseph sighed.
"Really? Building relationships with my coworkers is more important. You're living off me, so you should prioritize household duties over everything. If you don't, I won't be able to advance in my career. Make sure the house is clean and have beer and snacks ready by morning."
Without offering any words of sympathy for my loss, Joseph hung up, only thinking of himself. I was deeply disappointed in Joseph's coldness. There was nothing more important to me than Stephen's funeral. I decided to ignore Joseph's orders and did not return home. The next day, I attended the funeral from the morning. My phone kept ringing with calls from Joseph. But I continued to ignore them and focused on mourning Stephen. Then, one of my relatives called out to me. She said my phone had been ringing non-stop in my bag, and I should answer it. Everyone else chimed in, urging me to pick up the call. So, reluctantly, I answered the phone. Right away, Joseph started yelling.
"Hey! What are you doing? Today's the day your coworkers are coming over." "I know, but I'm at a funeral right now. Can you handle it yourself?"
I pleaded with Joseph to take care of it himself. But he wouldn't listen and insisted that I handle it. I couldn't understand why I should prioritize house chores over the funeral. It made no sense to me.
"Forget the funeral and come home now to prepare the snacks. And don't forget to buy beer."
This argument would continue until I finally agreed. Sighing in frustration, I agreed. "All right." Then, with a voice full of exasperation, Joseph said,
"For heaven's sake, I've got coworkers waiting here. You should have just said that from the beginning."
He hung up the phone. His tone made it seem like I was the one being unreasonable, and his selfishness infuriated me. But I pushed my frustration aside and returned to the funeral. I saw that the preparations for the cremation were starting. The staff mentioned it would take about 2 hours, giving me some time. I decided to use this time to rush over to Joseph. "Sorry, Mom. I have to go to Joseph's place for a bit. I'll be right back." She asked me what the urgent matter was. I didn't lie and told her the truth. Joseph is having a barbecue with his coworkers and told me to get beer and snacks. I asked him to go himself, but he wouldn't listen. I told him Stephen's funeral is more important, but he said this barbecue is. Mom was furious, and Dad, who was listening next to her, was also angry.
"Amanda, is that true?"
Dad asked, his fists trembling with anger. "It's true. I have to go buy beer and take it to Joseph, so I'm leaving now." With that, I left the funeral. Without time to change, I ran to the supermarket in my morning attire to buy beer and snacks, then headed home. When I arrived, Joseph was leisurely sitting in a chair, having his coworkers grill the meat. "You're late. We're out of beer, and the snacks are gone. It's a disaster. Apologize to these guys for making this barbecue so dull. Say you're sorry for making it so boring." He demanded an apology.
"I'm sorry for being late."
I deeply apologized to his coworkers. Then Joseph stood beside me and said,
"Sorry. My wife Amanda is really useless. She'll get more snacks ready in no time."
He made fun of me, calling me incompetent, but his coworkers were all silent. Not getting the reaction he expected, Joseph said,
What's wrong? Is it because the beer isn't your favorite brand?" "No, it's not that."
One of his coworkers looked at my outfit and asked,
"Amanda, is that what I think it is?"
He pointed at my clothes. I immediately answered the question, slightly looking down. "Oh, today is my brother Stephen's funeral. We're still holding the service, but Joseph asked me to run an errand. So I left in the middle to buy this. Sorry, I didn't have time to change." When I answered, my colleagues started buzzing. Then, one of them urged Joseph to attend the funeral.
"Hey, why didn't you tell us something so important? We'll handle the cleanup. You go to the funeral."
It was a perfectly reasonable response. But despite the consideration of my colleagues, Joseph made a statement that left everyone stunned.
No. Building relationships with the living is more important than a funeral."
When he said that, my colleagues looked at him with disbelief. It seemed they thought it was useless to talk to Joseph, so they apologized on his behalf.
"Amanda, we're so sorry. We had no idea about your situation and used your house for a barbecue without permission. We'll clean up and leave right away, so please return to the funeral." "What? No. It's not a big deal if Amanda doesn't attend the funeral. Besides, we'll clean up the house quickly and have a drink together this evening."
Joseph dismissed the funeral as something insignificant, and my colleagues looked at him with puzzled expressions. Joseph, completely oblivious to their reactions, ordered me around.
"Hey! Hurry up and clean up. Everyone's staying for dinner, so prepare that too."
Finally, my colleagues scolded the arrogant Joseph.
"Joseph, what are you thinking? Amanda is in the middle of her brother's funeral." "What? Yeah, so?"
Joseph seemed not to understand what they were trying to say. Frustrated, they explained. "What do you mean, yes, so? I never thought you'd be so heartless. Amanda, you should reconsider your relationship with him." They looked at Joseph with cold eyes. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Joseph started sweating and making excuses.
"No, it was a joke. You guys are overreacting. What if this actually leads to a divorce, huh?"
Joseph laughed, trying to lighten the mood. But it backfired. No, even as a joke, it's unforgivable. Everyone agreed with that sentiment. Then they told me to return to the funeral right away. We'll handle Joseph. Sorry for using your yard without permission, but please let us stay a bit longer.
No, I'm the one who should be thanking. Feel free to use the yard.
I took their advice and headed back to Stephen's funeral. I hurried back, just as the cremation was about to finish.
Amanda.
Dad rushed over, looking worried. Sorry for making you worry. But it's okay now. Joseph's colleagues, who were at our house, told me to come back immediately once they learned about the situation. They even said they'd talk to Joseph. It was reassuring. When I told him what happened at home, Dad looked relieved. But he still seemed dissatisfied.
It's fine to leave it to his colleagues, but I want to say something to Joseph myself.
Dad looked angrier than I had ever seen him. I understood why. I had left it to the colleagues for now, but I also planned to talk to Joseph later. I feel the same. I won't be satisfied until I say it myself. Agreeing with Dad, we promised to talk to Joseph after the funeral. As the funeral neared its end, we heard some commotion in the distance. When I looked over, I saw Joseph wobbling unsteadily, his eyes red from being severely scolded by his colleagues.
I'm so sorry for being late. Please let me attend Stephen's funeral too.
Moreover, he wasn't wearing a suit but a tracksuit. Joseph had been enjoying a barbecue in that tracksuit, and he came smelling of grilled meat. The family members all gave him suspicious looks due to his inappropriate attire and clearly intoxicated behavior. But Joseph probably didn't even think about his outfit. Even with everyone staring at him, he didn't seem to notice anything. Amanda, make sure Joseph stays in the upstairs waiting room. The funeral will be over soon, so have him wait until then. Dad instructed me in a voice only I could hear. His voice was trying to stay calm, suppressing his anger as much as possible. Following Dad's instructions, I called out to Joseph.
Joseph! Come over here for a moment.
With the family members watching, I led Joseph to the waiting room.
What about the funeral? After my colleagues told me off, I wanted to apologize to Robert and Nancy and attend.
Not understanding anything, Joseph was quickly interrupted by me.
It will be over soon.
If someone dressed so inappropriately and not considering the occasion is here, everyone will get distracted.
Cool your head and wait here until it's over.
I instructed him and immediately went back. Despite the cold stares from the family members, I endured until the funeral ended. Once the funeral was over, Dad and I quickly headed to Joseph.
Robert. My condolences. I'm really sorry about Stephen.
While waiting for us, Joseph had probably looked up funeral etiquette and phrases online. His actions seemed so artificial, which further irritated Dad.
Joseph, what exactly are you doing here? Well, of course, I came to say goodbye to Stephen.
He answered Dad's question, but I had already told Dad that Joseph prioritized the barbecue over the funeral. Joseph's excuse was immediately transparent.
No, you only came because your colleagues scolded you, didn't you?
With Dad's sharp question, Joseph became flustered. His demeanor alone was like an admission of guilt, but he desperately tried to cover it up.
No, that's not true. It may have ended up that way, but Stephen really helped me a lot, and I wanted to say my final goodbye. Then why didn't you come from the start?
After Joseph made his excuse, Dad immediately asked. I wasn't about to side with Joseph, so I supported Dad.
That's right. If you really thought that, you should have canceled the barbecue plans. I'm sure your colleagues would have understood, even if you canceled on the day. You can have a barbecue anytime, but today is the last chance to see Stephen.
When I said that, Joseph fell silent and looked down.
I heard what you said to Amanda. He said that building relationships with the living is more important than a funeral. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. It seems I was mistaken about you. I thought I could entrust Amanda to you, but I was wrong.
As he spoke, Joseph started to realize what Dad was getting at.
Wait, please, wait. I want you to divorce Amanda. From now on, don't have any more involvement with her.
Despite Joseph's attempts to stop him, Dad declared firmly.
Please, I'm asking you as well. I can't live with you anymore. Let's get a divorce. Why so suddenly?
For Joseph, being asked for a divorce came out of nowhere. But for me, there were more than enough reasons beyond just the funeral incident.
Since we got married, I've been forced to do all the housework under your orders without any freedom. Even when I wanted to work, you wouldn't let me. You tell me to save money, but you're not supportive at all. And to top it off, your behavior at the funeral was so embarrassing.
I struggled to keep my anger in check and spoke calmly. Joseph, being asked for a divorce by both me and my dad, seemed to have sobered up completely. He tried to persuade us somehow.
Okay. You can go to work. And we don't need to save money anymore. If you work, we'll have more income, so you don't need to save. Yes, I'll allow it. I hate that condescending attitude.
I wanted to have a calm discussion, but I had reached my limit.
Why do you always have to say you allow or permit things? I'm telling you I hate that, but you're not getting it at all. I've been listening too, and I have to say, Joseph, you haven't been supportive of Amanda at all. I don't think your marriage can be fixed like this.
Dad couldn't overlook the unfairness I was facing any longer. He stepped in to back me up.
I'm sorry. I'll apologize, just please don't divorce me.
When divorce was mentioned, Joseph desperately begged us to reconsider. I had a pretty good idea why he was so against it.
You just don't want to handle the housework or pay the car and house loans by yourself, right?
When I said that, Joseph's shoulders shook. It seemed I had hit the mark.
That house with the big yard, if you neglect it, it'll be overrun with weeds. And because you were so cheap, the vacuum cleaner and washing machine are both terrible. Living alone in that house will be tough, won't it?
Speaking slowly and in a low voice about the potential risks, Joseph's face turned pale as he imagined it. Seeing Joseph pale and silent, Dad spoke again.
It'll be tough, but hearing about that house makes me even more sure Amanda can't live there. Joseph, write the divorce papers right now.
Unable to bear the pressure from both of us, Joseph nodded without even making eye contact. Finally, I was able to divorce Joseph. After leaving the funeral home, I went back to our house to collect my things. Dad waited in the car while I went inside alone. Joseph spoke to me then.
Hey, are you divorcing me because Robert said so? If that's the case, let's talk it over again, just the two of us. Actually, I had already talked to Dad about wanting a divorce. He didn't just decide that on his own.
Joseph thought it was his chance with Dad not around, but I turned him down. Without further conversation, I calmly packed my things into the car.
All right then. I'll submit the divorce papers.
With that, Dad drove us back to my parents' house.
Dad, thank you for stepping in. If it had just been me, I wouldn't have been able to get divorced.
Don't mention it. I couldn't stand to see anything happen to my precious daughter. If Joseph bothers you again, let me know. Dad's promise to support me no matter what was reassuring. When we got home, Mom was worried about how things had turned out.
I've decided to divorce Joseph. Sorry to trouble you with coming back to live here again.
When she said that, Mom told me not to worry about it, repeating the same comforting words Dad had said earlier. I felt truly loved by my parents. After a while, I managed to get a job as a contract employee at a company near my parents' house. Having taken a break from working, I was initially anxious, but I was relieved to find myself in a very positive work environment. I was glad to have found such a great company, and my worries eased. From now on, I would be busy with work, but I also intended to actively help out with household chores. I constantly reminded myself not to become like Joseph. Since returning to work after the funeral, Joseph had been avoided by his colleagues. Despite boasting about the importance of building good relationships, he had failed miserably. It was almost laughable. From now on, Joseph would be known as an inconsiderate and terrible person at work. He would feel increasingly isolated, and his workplace relationships would deteriorate. No one would support him in his work either. Yet, due to the mortgage on the house and car, he would have to keep working at that job. Joseph would likely spend his days feeling miserable. I laughed heartily, feeling genuinely amused at his misfortune. Forgetting about poor Joseph, I decided to focus on living according to my own will and values. My name is Olivia. I'm 35 and have been married to my husband Lucas for 7 years. We have a 5-year-old son, Thomas. Normally, it's just the 3 of us living a peaceful life, but I have one major grievance. It's the long vacations and Christmas when we go to Lucas's parents' house. Only his parents live there, but during the holidays, his sister and her family join us too. During these gatherings, which sometimes exceed 10 people, I'm expected to handle all the meal preparations. Because I'm married to the eldest son, everyone seems to think it's my duty. His sisters don't help me at all. On top of that, they leave their kids with me and go out to have fun. Even Lucas doesn't offer me any help, so as the holidays approach, I start to dread them. Just the thought of preparing meals at my in-laws is painful, not to mention the harassment I endure from Lucas's mother, Ava. From the beginning of our marriage, Ava has criticized everything I do. The first time we went to visit after getting married, she told me out of the blue, "Olivia, please prepare all the meals while you're here." I was shocked. It was my first time in their kitchen, and everything was thrown at me. In a panic, I checked the fridge, finding almost nothing. I had to start by shopping for groceries. "Do you want anything specific to eat?" I asked with a smile without showing my irritation.
"Just make something delicious. Don't check with us every time, just get on with the cooking."
Jackson, Lucas's father, seemed nice and calm, but I couldn't figure out what he really thought. Ava was always openly hostile towards me. Even when I casually asked Lucas about his parents' favorite dishes, "Anything's fine, don't worry too much about it," he always responds so casually. Lucas is originally unreliable, but since then, my distrust in him has only grown. In the end, I decided to make a safe choice and cook curry. As the smell of curry began to waft from the kitchen, Ava started her snide remarks.
"Curry gives me heartburn. I'll have to take some antacid tonight."
Without time to make anything else, I served the curry for dinner. Ava complained that the curry was too spicy, or that she preferred pork over beef.
"Anyone can make a decent curry,"
she remarked, leaving the comment hanging in the air, yet she went for seconds. Meanwhile, Jackson ate without saying a word, but after he finished, he let out a deep sigh and left the room. While Ava's reactions are irritating, Jackson's sigh feels more condemning than her snide remarks. Dealing with just my in-laws' meals is stressful enough, but it gets even worse when Lucas's sisters and their families join. Harper's family consists of Lucas's sister Harper, her husband Ethan, and their daughter. Harper, in her appearance and manner of speaking, is frighteningly similar to Ava. Together, they hurl insults at me, making it feel like there are 2 Avas. When Harper comes to visit, she expects me to handle everything from cooking to making beds. Of course, she doesn't thank me, she takes it for granted. Ethan, usually quiet around his in-laws and Harper, becomes tyrannical when they're not around.
"Go buy cigarettes,"
he'd demand, treating me more like a housemaid than family. Their daughter Emma, much like Harper, seems spiteful.
"Olivia, we're out of juice."
Then Ethan would join in, ordering,
"Olivia, I'm out of beer. Bring some."
Laughing foolishly, the two of them enjoy themselves. They are usually quiet in front of Harper, probably because they're used to being scolded by her. They seem to let loose when at the in-laws. For me, who ends up doing all the work, it's unbearable. Natalie's family includes Lucas's sister Natalie, her husband Mason, and their son. Compared to the insidious Ava and Harper, Natalie is brighter and easier to talk to. She always comes to chat while I'm preparing meals. While it's nice to be approached so casually, Natalie doesn't help at all. At first, I used to listen to her seriously, but if she's not going to help, she's just in the way. Eventually, when I responded non-committally to her chatter,
"Are you even listening to me?"
she'd snap. Busy with work, I had to listen to Natalie's endless, meaningless stories about her husband's complaints or her in-laws' snide remarks. I wanted to vent to Natalie too, but I couldn't dare speak ill of the in-laws. As soon as Natalie realizes I'm not fully engaged, she'd tattle to Ava and Harper. Then I'd get scolded by both Ava and Harper.
"Just because she's your sister-in-law doesn't mean you can ignore her. You should at least listen to her. Such a mean spirit, bullying your weaker sister."
They'd freely insult me. I wanted to retort, "Who's the mean one here?" But I didn't have the courage. All I could do was endure the long vacations and Christmases. Even when I was pregnant, the treatment didn't change.
"I worked as usual the day after I gave birth,"
Ava would brag, expecting the same from me. I heard from Lucas that Ava had been badly harassed by her mother-in-law too. It seems she's intent on making me experience the same misery. I wish she would stop returning the ill treatment she received onto her daughter-in-law. Thomas was born in December, so that year, we didn't go to the in-laws for Christmas. "Why don't you go home alone?" I suggested to Lucas. He replied grumpily, "It's boring to go back by myself, so let's skip it this year." He informed me that year, the siblings didn't stay at the in-laws for Christmas as usual. They left immediately. Without me there, nobody could handle the meal preparations, so no one stayed overnight. But from the next vacation onwards, the hellish treatment at the in-laws returned. Now, I had to take care of Thomas while preparing meals and accommodations. When Thomas dirted his clothes and I had to do laundry at the in-laws,
"Since we're letting you use the washing machine, do our laundry as well."
they started making me wash their laundry too. Seeing this, the sisters-in-law began piling their laundry on me as well. I ended up folding Ava's and her sister's laundry. Completely turned into a housemaid, they even dumped childcare on me.
"Looking after one or two kids is the same. Please take care of my son,"
they'd say before leaving the newborn with me and going out to have fun with Ava and the family. Only Jackson stayed home, pretending not to notice anything and watching TV. I was shocked when even Lucas left with Ava and the others. From that moment, my affection for Lucas began to cool off. As I was taking care of the two babies, one of them would inevitably start crying. Then Jackson would explode in anger.
"The noise is so loud, I can't hear the TV. Finally got rid of the annoying bunch, and I can't even watch TV in peace."
Jackson, usually quiet in front of Ava and her daughters, didn't hesitate to complain to me. I hated his silent pressure on regular days, but him yelling like this was just pathetic. The men in this house only act tough when the women aren't around, then badmouth them behind their backs, especially Mason, who is amusing to watch because of his drastic two-faced nature. In front of Ava and the sisters-in-law, he's all smiles, serving food and drinks diligently. But when the women are absent, he's swapping nasty comments about their wives with Ethan. Not caring about how it affects me, his wife, they freely talk trash.
"Why do we have to come here every vacation and Christmas? I feel the same. It's nothing but torture for us husbands.
Moreover,
just between us, my marriage isn't going too well, so next time I might not be here,"
they'd say, laughing uproariously. Whether they're joking or serious. They don't care that I'm listening, the conversation escalates. Honestly, my marriage isn't great either. My wife is too domineering, always looking down on me. They glanced around, and seeing it was just me, they began whispering.
"My wife is just like her mother. Thinking about her getting even tougher with age is dreadful." Daughters do resemble their mothers, don't they? Recently, even her face is starting to look like her mother's, and it's creepy.
Both of them were rolling on the floor, laughing at their own words. I began to wonder if Lucas also talked badly about me when I wasn't around. These two, laughing at such talk, would transform into entirely different people the moment Ava or the sisters-in-law appeared. They knew that if I told Ava or the sisters-in-law about their behavior, I would be the one accused of lying. That's why they felt free to speak ill of Ava and the sisters-in-law in front of me. Year by year, the workload dumped on me during the holidays at the in-laws grew heavier. Apart from meals, overnight arrangements, childcare, and laundry, now I was even tasked with picking up and dropping off Natalie's family. During a meal right before everyone was about to leave.
"I'd like a beer, but I have to drive home, so maybe I should refrain,"
Mason mentioned. Hearing this, Ava chimed in. "From next time, let's have Olivia pick you up. That way, you can drink beer without any worries," she suggested to Mason. Mason, perhaps jokingly, agreed, but Ava took it seriously. "No, you don't need to go that far," he said. But cutting off his words, Ava commanded, "From now on, you will do the pickups." No one dared to object. In the car back home, even I, usually restrained, lashed out at Lucas.
"I'm already cooking, arranging accommodations, taking care of the kids, and even doing everyone's laundry. Now I have to do pickups too."
Lucas, taken aback by my anger, was at a loss for words.
"Is there no limit to harassing your wife? How much more do they want to exploit me?"
My anger was justified. The in-laws' house was in a snowy region, making Christmas visits challenging. Natalie's house was a 2-hour drive one way, but in heavy snow, it could take nearly double that time. I knew Ava would expect me to finish cooking and then go pick up Natalie's family. Exhausted and asked to drive in such conditions was absurd. I'm not accustomed to long drives, and surely Natalie's family would be terrified too. I was furious that Lucas, knowing this, didn't stand up to Ava.
"I'm cutting ties with your family. I won't see Jackson, Ava, or your sisters ever again."
I didn't want to see Ava or the sisters who did as they pleased. Hoping to calm my fury, he responded with a forced smile. "Totally fine. I'll let Mom and everyone know, so don't worry." When Lucas talks smoothly like this, he's usually just trying to appease the situation. But with his agreement, I finally felt freed from the in-laws' clutches. I marvel at my own patience over the past 7 years of marriage. That Christmas, I went on a trip with Thomas and my parents. It was the first time since Thomas was born that I spent Christmas with my parents. It's rare for us to be together for Christmas. Is it okay for Lucas to go back to his parents alone? Having shared my in-laws' harsh treatment with them, my parents were surprised by the trip.
"It's okay. I have Lucas's permission, so he won't complain,"
I assured them, though I wasn't sure if Lucas had really talked to his parents. He had reluctantly agreed to cut ties with his family after my outburst, but I doubted his parents and sisters would accept it easily. They had been taking it easy so far, likely avoiding preparing meals themselves. However, they probably thought they could easily buy meals from the supermarket, so I assumed they weren't too worried. My parents, seeing their grandson Thomas after a long time, were overjoyed, and Thomas seemed to have fun too. When we visited the in-laws, I never had time to pay attention to Thomas, and I realized he must have felt lonely. Watching the three of them having fun, I completely forgot about the in-laws. Then, in the lobby of the luxurious hotel where we were relaxing, a familiar man walked in with a young woman on his arm. He resembled Mason, but he was supposed to be at the in-laws. The more I looked, the more he seemed familiar, and it appeared he noticed my stare. The man made a surprised face and quickly turned away. Likely because he was up to something shady. I pretended not to see and averted my gaze from the man. Just then, I received a call from Lucas.
"Hello, what's up? Please, can you come to the family home right now? It's chaos here, nothing is prepared. Haven't we agreed that I wouldn't go anymore from this year?"
I wasn't surprised. I had expected something like this.
"I did mention it, but it seems the message didn't get across,"
he replied. I figured he hadn't really talked to his parents. I had already informed them that I wouldn't be able to pick up Natalie's family. Natalie had complained, but it seemed she had been pacified. Lucas was desperately trying to get me to come back. But I was more focused on the commotion and what sounded like Natalie's voice in the background.
"Mason has run off with some woman. He said he was going to work, but when I called the office, they said he was off today."
Hearing Natalie's words confirmed that the man I saw was indeed her husband.
"Mason is at the hotel we're staying at right now,"
I responded. Lucas was taken aback by the sudden shift in the conversation.
What? My brother-in-law is there?
I decided to tell the truth, thinking it would serve Natalie right for how she had treated me. Natalie must have heard Lucas's voice, as she snatched his mobile phone and started shouting at me.
Mason is there. Where are you right now?
Natalie screamed, almost rupturing my eardrums. Young and beautiful woman, high-class hotel. I replied. Next, Ava grabbed the phone and started yelling at me.
How dare you go to a hotel on your own? You think that's acceptable?
Even though they're shouting at me loudly, I can hear them.
I've discussed this with Lucas. I have his permission to not associate with you anymore.
I replied, deliberately provoking her. Ava started screaming something incomprehensible. Then Harper snatched the phone. We can't even have a meal without you. Please, somehow come back. Harper said, unusually polite, but I knew she only spoke like that when in trouble. In the background, Emma, Harper's ill-natured daughter, yelled, Olivia! Hurry up and prepare the meal! I couldn't help but laugh, realizing she was just echoing Harper's true feelings. The in-laws' house seemed to be in such a frenzy that I just hung up the phone. Since I had set my phone to reject calls, I didn't know what happened afterward until Lucas returned home. Seeing Lucas's reaction upon his return, I was prepared for the possibility of divorce. Worst case scenario, I was ready to make a life for Thomas and myself as an office worker. When Lucas returned from his parents' house, he apologized profoundly. I now understand how hard it's been for you all this time. I'm truly sorry. Lucas had been burdened with preparing the Christmas meal, doing everyone's laundry, and taking care of the kids, especially Natalie's child, throughout the holiday. Natalie, after hearing from me about the affair, had tracked Mason down to our hotel, apparently catching him in the act. Indeed, when we were leaving, the hotel staff seemed flustered, and there was talk of a quarreling couple. Perhaps that was her. Everyone had complained about Lucas's cooking, having never done it before, and, fed up with their nasty remarks.
I'm cutting ties with this house too. I'm never coming back,
he snapped. It seems Lucas has declared cutting ties as well. Hearing Lucas's declaration of disconnection, I felt relieved and confessed.
If you hadn't decided to cut ties with your family, I was planning to divorce you.
Smiling as I said this, Lucas began to cry and apologized again. I'm really sorry. Believing in his tears, I decided to keep striving together as a couple. From that year on, we decided to go on trips with my parents for Christmas. Both my parents and our family are delighted, and we intend to keep this tradition. Meanwhile, the in-laws' house doesn't seem to gather anyone anymore. Natalie and her husband divorced soon after. Natalie, having custody of the child, now had to work to support her life, leaving her with no long vacations or Christmases. Harper also realized that if the other siblings didn't return, she would have to prepare the meals herself, and didn't want to go through that hassle just to visit her parents' house. Left alone, the in-laws led a lonely life, unable to see their children or grandchildren. Ava, unable to harass anyone else, seemed to have turned her frustrations on Jackson, and I heard from Lucas that Jackson had left home. Lucas, deeply affected by the criticism of his cooking at the in-laws, has been cooking more often lately. Watching Lucas improve his cooking skills makes all that commotion feel like a distant memory. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet.
Violet!
I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining of Violet's face. To Mom. It described the circumstances that had led Violet to her current situation. And at the end, these words were written. Please take revenge on my husband Andrew for me. That's my last request. Violet. As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. Feeling a sense of powerless anger, I clenched the letter in my hand. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge in place of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life." I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. "My name is Scarlett. I work as an insurance agent at a major insurance company. After losing my husband early, I worked hard for my daughter Violet. It was often difficult, but thinking of Violet somehow gave me the strength to keep going. Then, about half a year ago, Violet told me she was getting married."
Violet's at that age now.
Violet had just turned 24. Now that I am 53 years old, I was feeling my age more and more. But there's no time for rest. Marriage is expensive, after all.
Violet's wedding is next month. No time to rest.
I wanted to help her for the wedding expenses and prepare a celebration. Maybe soon, I would have grandchildren. It was hard, but also incredibly joyful. But misfortunes come in times of happiness. That day, the phone call I received was just the thing.
Violet's.
The caller was a police officer. With a slightly strained voice, he informed me that Violet had passed away. Stunned, I let my mobile phone slip from my grasp. Her wedding was coming soon, why did Violet? Those thoughts raced through my mind. About a week later, I received an unexpected letter from Violet. I didn't know how Violet had died until I read this letter. Violet's letter began with a meeting her future husband, Andrew. I heard that Violet and Andrew met at the confectionery shop where she worked. Indeed, Violet loved making sweets. Probably because her best friend's family owned a confectionery shop. She got interested after enjoying their delicious treats and started making her own. Putting that aside, Violet went to a local culinary school after high school to study confectionery formally. She seriously learned confectionery skills there, and she got a job at a confectionery chain with several stores in the state. "Nice to meet you. I'm Andrew, I'll train you. I've got a bit more experience, but feel free to talk to me." Andrew, a bit older, became Violet's supervisor when she started her job. Turns out, Andrew was the son of the president of the confectionery company that owned the shop where Violet worked. Incidentally, whenever Violet was scolded by other pastry chefs, Andrew quickly defended her.
"She's new, there's no need to be so harsh."
Of course, everyone knew Andrew was the president's son. So, when he said something like that, no one could oppose him. On the other hand, Violet found Andrew, who defended her, to be very reliable. Soon, a trust developed between them, and it was only a matter of time before it turned into romantic feelings. Eventually, about a year after she started working, Andrew confessed his feelings to Violet. That's how they started dating and gradually deepened their relationship. But Violet wasn't just focused on romance. She diligently worked as a pastry chef. During work, she followed the instructions of Andrew and her superiors, and after hours, she practiced to improve her skills. Sometimes Andrew would join her for practice. It seemed those moments were important in strengthening their bond. By the time they started dating, Violet had become a competent pastry chef. But all of this was part of Andrew's scheme. Violet only realized this after they started dating. Time passed, and a few months ago, Andrew approached Violet with a proposal. "Violet, a sweets exhibition will be held in 3 months, right? I need to discuss something about that."
"The sweets exhibition? The one at the department store downtown? I heard popular confectionaries will be selling their treats there."
"Yes, that one. Apparently, there's been a vacancy, and suddenly our shop is participating." Andrew spoke with a hint of confusion. Violet tilted her head. "Our shop is popular, right? Is there any problem? We have to come up with a new dessert. We also need to create next season's new items." "I see." Violet understood. Confectionery shops often introduce new items each season. For instance, treats for events like Valentine's Day or Christmas are needed. "We have our wedding next month. I can't take on more. That's why I wanted to hear your ideas, Violet." Andrew clasped his hands together, making a pleading gesture. Violet sighed softly. "Can't be helped. I'll bring my recipe notebook tomorrow. That would be a great help.
Make sure you let everyone know it is my idea.
That's all they talked about at that time. But the next day, an incident occurred. After work, Violet took her recipe notebook and headed to the kitchen. Sorry to keep you waiting. She entered the kitchen. But Andrew was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he's still working? Being the company heir must be busy. Thinking this, Violet decided to wait for Andrew. While looking through her recipe notebook, she suddenly felt someone's presence behind her. Andrew? Were you working? Violet turned around. But Andrew wasn't there. Oh? Violet? What are you doing here? Ah, Mr. Carter. It was Mr. Carter. He worked for the confectionery company but wasn't a pastry chef. He was more of an office worker, handling tasks like accounting. It seemed he came to lock up. Do you still have something to do here? Yes. I'm here to help Andrew with his work. Andrews. Oh, I see. Mr. Carter laughed unpleasantly. Was he thinking something bad? Sensing this, Violet's expression soured. Suddenly, Mr. Carter shouted.
Even if you're dating the boss's son, I can't overlook such behavior from an employee. I'm not. I was just... quiet. Don't make excuses.
Mr. Carter advanced towards her. In a reflex, Violet threw him her recipe notebook. Mr. Carter covered his face and crouched down. Andrew came there.
What's going on? I heard a loud noise, Violet. Are you okay? What happened?
Andrew. It's just... Violet explained everything to Andrew. But, in reality, nothing had happened. Mr. Carter had just found that Violet and Andrew were meeting up. He jumped to unsavory conclusions on his own. Violet, upset by such bizarre suspicions, wore an annoyed expression. This displeased Mr. Carter, who attempted to reprimand her. So you threw Mr. Carter the recipe notebook, and he ended up like this. Yes, I'm sorry. Violet apologized. Meanwhile, Andrew checked on Mr. Carter. The area hit by the notebook was turning red. But luckily, there were no serious injuries.
I'll report this to the president. You'll be fired immediately.
That's not fair.
Shut up. Brace yourself.
Mr. Carter shouted angrily. Then Mr. Carter hurried out of the kitchen. What should I do, Andrew? It's okay. I'll handle it. But if it gets reported to your father, our relationship might be opposed. Violet was most afraid of that.
Don't worry. I'll always protect you. Andrew, leave it to me.
Later, this incident reached the president's ears. But Violet faced no punishment. It was because Andrew had intervened.
Andrew protected me.
Violet thought so. Their relationship seemed to grow even stronger. But all of this was also part of Andrew's scheme. A few days later, Violet would come to realize the whole truth. After the kitchen argument, Andrew said something to Violet. I feel bad asking this, Violet, but can you keep quiet about providing the idea? Why? You know, because of the matter of Mr. Carter. On the day of the incident, Andrew was alone in the kitchen. While Andrew was working on a new creation, Mr. Carter came in. There was an accident during Andrew's work, and a cooking utensil hit Mr. Carter's face. Andrew wanted to make it seem like that's what had happened. Reluctantly, Violet agreed. Sorry, Violet. It's actually your recipe. I'll return the notebook later. It's okay. You coordinated everything to protect me. Well, yeah. If that's the story we're going with, Mr. Carter agreed to it. Andrew spoke of the effort it took to align their testimonies. Violet felt deeply grateful to Andrew for his efforts on her behalf. However, a few days later, Violet, who had stayed late to clean up, was about to leave after changing. Passing by the office, she heard Andrew's voice. "Andrew's still here. I should say hello." But as she was about to enter, she froze at Andrew's words.
And that's how it went. Thanks to you, Mr. Carter.
Mr. Carter, what does that mean? Pondering, Violet listened closely to Andrew's voice. Soon, she heard Andrew's laughter. Then, his true feelings came out. Violet's just a convenient tool. Now that I've got her recipes, I don't need her anymore. Violet was stunned. Was I deceived? She covered her mouth, trying hard not to make a sound. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing. That recipe is really good. It's a waste to let that woman keep it. From there, she could only listen to the truth she didn't want to hear, in Andrew's gleeful voice. He had ordered other pastry chefs to scold Violet. Then he would intervene, earning Violet's trust. He also set up the situation with Mr. Carter, making Violet feel indebted and trapped. And in the confusion of that moment, he was glad to have stolen Violet's recipes. Andrew said that. And then he added, "If she tries to escape, I'll just confront her with a shocking truth." Andrew smiled unpleasantly. "What does he mean?" Violet wondered as Andrew answered himself. It's about fraud. She's already complicit in it without knowing." Andrew sneered. At that moment, Violet's mobile phone fell from her pocket. It made a sound as it hit the floor, and Andrew noticed the phone. Violet could see this through the gap in the door. "I have to get away," she thought, but her legs wouldn't move. Andrew quickly spotted Violet. He looked at her with a menacing expression. "Were you listening?" Well, it doesn't matter. If you try to run, I'll just accuse you." Andrew's lips curled into a smirk. Violet felt an intense fear of that smile. After that, Violet, unable to escape from Andrew, led a life dictated by him. She was also boldly made to help with the fraud he mentioned. However, Violet, being inherently honest and kind, couldn't endure such a life. Eventually, about a month later, Violet was found on the first floor of her apartment. There were no witnesses, but a passerby had heard a loud noise. When they checked, they found Violet lying below her room. According to the police, it's likely Violet did it herself. However, Andrew's laptop was found nearby. Perhaps Violet intended to expose Andrew's fraud by doing so. But the police examined the laptop and found no noteworthy data. I had suspected Andrew, who lived with her, from the moment I heard of the incident. However, on that day, Andrew was not at home. He was out of state for work. So, Andrew couldn't be the culprit. I had no choice but to accept that. Afterward, along with Andrew and his parents, we completed Violet's funeral. Even after everything ended, I remained in a daze. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. If only my husband were here, maybe he could have helped ease the loneliness. Violet, why? That was all I could mutter. I felt powerless. For several days, I cried, thinking that. Then, a week passed after Violet's death. I had to accept the reality of losing Violet. Just as I was beginning to come to terms with it, a letter arrived. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet. "Violet!" I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining of Violet's face. To Mom. It detailed the circumstances that had led Violet to her situation. The truth Violet penned ignited anger in me. It meticulously described how she was deceived by Andrew, her recipes stolen and forced into fraud. And finally, there was this line written in the letter. "Please take revenge on Andrew for me. That's my last request, Violet." As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. I clenched the letter, overwhelmed by a sense of powerless anger. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge on behalf of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. I quickly arranged for a taxi. Violet's letter had an address written on it. There must be something important there.
Violet. I should go here, right?
Clutching the letter, I jumped into the taxi. Heading to the address. It was a local bank. According to Violet's letter, there seems to be something in a safe deposit box. I showed my ID to the staff and explained the situation. I also showed the bank card and key for the safe deposit box. The staff then led me to the safe deposit box. Violet had apparently told them I would be coming. I opened the box in the room I was led to. Inside were documents and a notebook.
This is.
I quietly read on. The documents were written by Violet. They detailed the methods and content of the fraud, and the people involved in it. The notebook was Violet's recipe notebook, containing recipes of products sold at Andrew's shop.
Violet, you did all this.
Even just from this, I could tell Violet's meticulous nature. Tears flowed as I thought of Violet. But I couldn't just sit and mourn. I quickly put the documents and notebook into my bag. Then, I noticed some jewelry. It was a heart-shaped pendant with a yellow sticky note attached. Treating it so carelessly, you wouldn't do that, Violet. Muttering, I carefully picked up the pendant. Then I saw the words on the sticky note. Instantly, I was shocked and disturbed. I clutched the pendant tightly.
Violet, I'll definitely take revenge. Just wait.
With renewed determination, I left the bank. I headed straight to a local confectionery shop. It was the family shop of Wendy, Violet's close friend. Wendy, whom I had seen at Violet's funeral, was at the shop front.
Hello, Wendy.
Violet's mom? About the other day. Wendy hugged me, and I hugged her back. There's something I want to talk about. Do you have a moment? Wendy looked towards the back. A man, presumably Wendy's father, nodded. Then, please come this way. Wendy led me to the back of the shop. The back was a residence. I was taken to the living room. As Wendy served coffee, I spoke abruptly. Actually, I received a letter from Violet.
From Violet?
Wendy was surprised and confused. Read it first. We'll talk after that. I handed Violet's letter to Wendy. Wendy read it silently, with great concentration. Eventually, she, like me, was in tears. Then, she handed the letter back to me. Thank you. I'll give this back to you first. So, what do you think?
We can't forgive him. I won't.
Wendy clenched her fist. I felt relieved knowing Wendy shared my feelings. Will you help me then?
Yes. But what should I do?
You're Violet's best friend, so you know about this, right? I showed her Violet's recipe notebook from the safe deposit box. Wendy immediately affirmed. This was in the safe deposit box, but the moment I saw the contents of the box, it was as if someone had whispered an idea to me. I decided to use it as part of my plan for revenge against Andrew, as Violet's wish. I explained the plan to Wendy. Then, I entrusted Violet's recipe notebook to her. Can you do this for me?
For Violet's sake, yes.
Wendy strongly agreed. That's the first step prepared. I felt a bit relieved. Then I quietly stood up and shook hands with Wendy. Thank you, I'm counting on you. Saying this, I left Wendy's place. I headed to another location. It was a branch of the confectionery shop where Violet used to work. The shop was quite far from the one where Violet had worked. I spent a lot of time getting there. Upon entering, I asked a woman who looked like a part-time employee. Excuse me, is Mr. Carter here? The woman looked puzzled. Then I added, My daughter worked at another shop and was helped by Mr. Carter. I showed her the employee card given to me by Andrew after Violet's funeral. The woman immediately smiled. Soon Mr. Carter came out from the back. Seeing my face, he turned pale. He recognized me as Violet's mother from the funeral. Can we talk outside for a bit? If you refuse, you know what will happen, right? I smiled at him, deliberately gentle. Thanks to that, Mr. Carter agreed readily. We moved to a nearby park, and Mr. Carter immediately apologized.
I'm so sorry. I was threatened too.
What are you talking about?
I mean,
Mr. Carter, without being asked, started confessing everything he had done. He was only approached by Andrew under threat, and he had no choice but to call out Violet. He wasn't involved in anything else. It was all Andrew who dragged him into evil. He never thought Violet would take her own life. Mr. Carter apologized to me, crying.
apologies won't change anything. Violet will never come back.
I couldn't help but raise my voice. Mr. Carter closed his mouth, frightened. Realizing I said too much, I took a deep breath. Then, with a stern look, I asked Mr. Carter, "If you're willing to apologize, will you do me a favor?" "Yes."
Then, please testify about this incident. And don't say anything to Andrew. Understood?
Once confirmed, Mr. Carter agreed, though fearfully. Afterward, I had Mr. Carter testify everything. I recorded all of it and even let him write and sign a statement of his testimony. That's the second step done. Now, Wendy, I'm counting on you. I muttered softly, watching Mr. Carter's dejected figure return to the store. After a while, I received an invitation from Andrew.
A sweets exhibition.
It was the invitation to the very sweets exhibition. Andrew didn't know I was aware of the truth. So, the invitation boldly included these words. "We'll be showcasing sweets Violet praised highly. Please come for Violet's sake." I almost tore it up in anger. But the preparations would all be for nothing by doing so. I managed to restrain myself and waited for the day of the sweets exhibition. Day after day. I watched the calendar. Finally, the first day of the sweets exhibition arrived. I went to the venue with Violet's employee card on my chest. Upon entering, Andrew greeted me. He approached with a dubious smile, offering a handshake. "Scarlett, I'm glad you could make it." "Yes." Violet was looking forward to it, wasn't she? "Yes. I've prepared my masterpiece for this occasion." He guided me to a display filled with magnificent cakes and chocolates. I asked Andrew with a forced smile, "Which ones did you make?" "This time, I made chocolates. Valentine's Day is coming up, after all." Andrew pointed to chocolates in the center of the display. Stylishly decorated chocolates. But these were made from Violet's recipes. Thinking that made me seethe with anger. Then, a woman's voice came from behind. "May I interview you?" I turned to see a woman holding a file. Apparently a magazine journalist, with a camera. Andrew and the woman talked. After a while, the woman tilted her head, puzzled. "Excuse me, are you sure you made these?" Andrew was taken aback by her words. Then he retorted with a sneer.
Of course I did. What are you talking about? But I saw similar ones at another store. What? What do you mean?
Andrew raised his voice. Several guests in the venue turned to look. The woman continued.
The explanation and design are very similar. That's impossible. Which store is that?
Andrew's voice grew louder. The woman, though scared, pointed to a distant location. Andrew rushed off. And I quickly followed. Soon, we arrived in front of a certain store. There, Wendy was standing by the storefront. Wendy nodded slightly when she saw me. Then she addressed Andrew. "Long time no see."
It's you. You stole our shop's recipes.
Stole? That's not true. Wendy smiled. Meanwhile, Andrew, red-faced, raised his voice.
Then what's this? It's almost identical to our product.
He pointed to chocolates lined up, almost identical to those in his shop. Then Andrew pointed to a sign at the storefront and shouted,
And this? Doesn't melt easily even in warm places. What's this about?
It's our newly developed product.
Don't joke with me. This is exactly the same as the unique method I devised.
Andrew's voice stirred up murmurs among the bystanders. But Wendy, undisturbed, retorted, That's just a coincidence. But if it's the same, please stop using it at your shop. What did you say?
This is made using a patented method developed by my father years ago. Patented method?
Andrew's face turned pale. Actually, Violet's recipe used that patented method. But Violet had no intention of infringing the patent. It is because she planned to sell it with Wendy.
This is a recipe Violet came up with for our future shop together. You stole the recipe from Violet.
Wendy's words silenced Andrew. Clearly losing his composure, Andrew was questioned by the earlier woman.
What about it? Did you steal the recipe? No, Violet was our employee, Anne.
Andrew started making inconsistent excuses. But nobody believed him. Eventually, Andrew was unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, and he fled the scene. I quickly followed Andrew. The woman from earlier also followed. Returning to his shop space, Andrew began hurriedly packing up. Apparently, he intended to act as if nothing had happened. But I wouldn't allow it. I approached Andrew.
Wait! We're not done talking. So, Violet provided the recipe. What's your complaint? I have one. What you did wasn't just that, was it? Just that, what do you mean?
Sweat beaded on Andrew's forehead. Knowing this was a critical moment, I raised my voice.
Your shop has been evading taxes. Ah.
Andrew instinctively covered his mouth. The surrounding gazes intensified on him. I continued, calmly detailing Andrew's actions.
First, you kept a separate record of pre-ordered products, not accounting for them in sales. I don't know what you're talking about. Moreover, you falsified inventory records for raw materials. That's how you evaded taxes, right? I don't know anything about that.
Andrew attempted to deny loudly. I then produced a copy of the documentation Violet had compiled.
Violet detailed the method here. Look at this.
I scattered the documents on the spot. Several people rushed to pick them up. They began comparing and discussing among themselves. Soon, the journalist questioned Andrew.
What about this? According to these documents, her story seems true.
Andrew was silent in response to the journalist's question. Soon, similar voices arose from the audience.
I work in accounting, and this is clearly fraud. It's definitely tax evasion.
Faced with these accusations, Andrew's patience finally snapped.
Shut up. None of this concerns you. I didn't do anything. This can't be evidence.
Andrew's outburst silenced the crowd. In the midst of this, I took out my mobile phone. Then, I played a certain audio recording. Listen up. Mark the inventory as less.
But that would mean... Don't argue with me. You can't escape this now.
The voices of Violet and Andrew echoed in the venue. People from afar also started to gather closer. The recording continued. What about today's pre-order receipts? I destroyed them. They were cash payments, convenient for fudging the sales. That's again?
Shut up. If we paid taxes properly, we'd never make any money.
The recording ended with those words from Andrew. I glanced and saw Andrew's face had turned ashen.
This recording was in a pendant Violet had. It was an IC recorder. That heart-shaped one?
Yes.
It was an IC recorder. Violet left it as irrefutable evidence.
Andrew crumbled. Then, a security guard arrived with a police officer. The officer looked at Andrew and me, then asked Andrew, who was almost collapsing.
I've heard quite a bit. Is it true that you were evading taxes? No. That is. We'll ask you more thoroughly at the police station. For now, would you please come with us?
The officer spoke calmly to Andrew. But his eyes were not kind. I handed the officer Mr. Carter's testimony. Then I told him about Violet's suicide.
I understand. We'll investigate that as well,
the officer said, casting a stern glance at Andrew. But Andrew had no strength left to argue. Afterward, Andrew was arrested on charges of tax evasion and other offenses. Violet's case was also thoroughly investigated. However, it wasn't that Andrew directly caused Violet's death. In the end, he was only charged with assault for Violet's case. Nevertheless, the arrest had a significant impact. In just a few months, Andrew's father's confectionery company was driven into bankruptcy. Naturally, all the operating stores were closed. The shop where Violet worked became a rented space. I don't know what will happen to Andrew's sentencing, but I hope he reflects on his actions. After Andrew was taken away by the police, Wendy distributed the chocolates to the people at the venue. These chocolates were designed by my best friend. While handing them out, I wished Violet could have seen this. Especially the customers smiling as they tasted the chocolates. Violet would have loved to see that. Tears welled up in my eyes. But I had no time to cry. Because the sale of those chocolates had been decided. We want to name the product Violet. Because it's a light violet color, and most importantly, it was Violet's idea. Wendy spoke with a smile. Then she added, "Would you write the product tag for us? We want to display it with Violet's photo at the store." So, for the first time in my life, I started working on creating a store display tag. I hope Violet would like it. Speaking to Violet's smiling photo, I reached for a light purple-colored pencil.
Are you sure it's okay to accept this?
I asked the woman in front of me. She responded and nodded. With a charming smile, seemingly filled with happiness.
That made sense. She had submitted a birth certificate. Although probably she had gone through a tough childbirth, this young woman seemed to savor the joy of a new family and resolve of motherhood in her heart.
I accepted the birth certificate because I am a civil servant for working here. I carefully checked the document if there are any errors.
I paid special attention to the father's section, but she didn't change her expression and waited patiently for my process.
Occasionally, she talked to the man standing next to her about a gift.
The man who was talked by the woman didn't even nod properly. Or perhaps he couldn't.
He was pale, trembling, and avoiding my gaze as if trying to escape.
I thought to myself, that makes sense too. Because this pathetic, trembling man is my husband.
I am Sarah, a housewife who has been working in the health bureau for 10 years. I didn't have children, but I had a modest wedding with David, who works in a trading company, and thought we would continue to live peacefully, quietly together.
That's what I believed. I started to sense something odd about my husband David after he passed his promotion exam.
His success would lead to a significant career leap at a young age, so David had been studied hard at home, and I supported him tirelessly while working. My efforts paid off, and I was truly happy when the results came. He was seen as a promising person among his peers. He started going to high-end clubs almost every week. It was for introducing clients, as told by his boss.
As David, it must have been the most attention-grabbing period of his life. Maybe he misunderstood something. When he returned from those glamorous and flashy places, the meals I cooked seemed too simple and poor to him, and he gradually started to look down on me.
Cheap chicken again? My salary gonna be increased, so we could afford a bit more luxury. At first, he would say like that, but gradually his words became harsher, and turned into criticism directed at me.
Switch to better meat. The meat was good on the celebration day, wasn't it? But I'm scared of buying expensive meat on regular days if I would be a mess it up.
Haha. Your cooking wasn't bad. It kind of feels like you're indirectly saying I don't earn enough, which I don't like. Of course, I never had such intentions.
I was living a normal life and thinking that we needed to tighten our budget, especially when the salary increased.
One day, David finally said,
I can't even tell to the people what I'm eating like this. And he stopped eating my cooking.
When he got promoted, he used to say,
It's thanks to you, Sarah. I'm lucky to have such a wonderful wife. But now he had changed so much. Sarah, aren't you motivated for doing household chores?
Huh? What do you mean? I'm doing everything normally.
You haven't watered the plants outside. Weeds are growing, too. And I told you to wash the car, right? When are you planning to do it? You keep saying you're busy, but is your job at the health bureau demanding really? I always tried not to let dirty dishes or laundry pile up, but I just didn't have the time for the balcony plants. I couldn't get to weeding on weekdays, and washing the car took even more time. Plus, only David used the car, so it seemed unfair to leave it to me. David's one-sided and condescending remarks increased day by day.
He forcefully linked the household chores to my job and even started to mock the fact that I worked at the health bureau.
I remembered the days I desperately took the civil service exam and managed to suppress my frustration somehow.
If you're busy, I'll eat out for a while.
You don't have to do the household chores.
Next week is our wedding anniversary. Do you remember the restaurant you used to book every year? I had marked it clearly on the calendar. This restaurant was popular, slightly expensive, reservation only, which we had been going to since before our marriage. The old David would have booked it 6 months in advance. Had that changed too? When I timidly asked, David suddenly brightened up.
But the following words were shocking, so intense, I felt like my heart would shatter.
Ah, that place? Don't worry about it. I've reserved a seat. But on that day, I just can't adjust my schedule with a client.
And they told me to set up a meeting, so I thought it was a good place to introduce them.
Introduce? What do you mean?
I mean, I'm using the reservation for a business dinner. You get it, right? There's no point in forcibly celebrating on that day. It's my reservation, so it should be fine.
David said it so casually.
I was shocked but felt like I couldn't show my tears, so I just held them back.
That's not what I wanted to ask. I was astounded by David's behavior.
I didn't know how to put my feelings into words and faltered.
He looked at me with annoyance.
If you focused on the housework instead of your job at the health bureau, I'd be more motivated to come home and work hard. But if you can't even manage that, what's the point of working? Why don't you just quit?
It was true that I had been getting home late recently due to helping other departments.
I had no idea if David really wanted me to quit because of my supposedly inadequate housework, but he seems to just wanted to assert dominance and lash out at me.
Although my job was busy and the income was stable. It was important and I took pride in it.
Despite David's harsh words, I had no intention of quitting.
A few weeks later, I was working as usual. The health bureau's reception gets very crowded during campaigns and events. Although it wasn't my department, I helped out by speaking to visitors and conveying their concerns to the staff. Just then, a couple approached me, and the woman handed over a document cheerfully.
Hello, we've come to submit a birth notification for our child.
It wasn't my department, so I couldn't accept it. I was about to tell the woman I'd check with the staff, then I saw the man next to her. And I was so shocked that I nearly lost my breath.
It was David, my supposed husband. Our eyes met, and he looked just as surprised and then awkward. Could you check if there's anything wrong with this form?
The woman, unaware of the situation, was holding out the form and waiting for me.
David's name was written in the father's section of the birth notification. Congratulations. I'll have a check with our staff, please wait a moment.
I guided them calmly. I went back to check the counter and checked with the staff, but they were all busy. Additionally, they were so occupied. And asked me to check if the necessary fields were correctly filled, even though they couldn't process it.
My mind was in turmoil. Should I have confronted David then and there?
Did she know I was his wife when she approached me?
I was just helping out with guidance today. It must have been a mere coincidence that I encountered them.
Thank you for waiting. I'll check for any errors now. Yes, please. I returned to them, maintaining my composure and acting as just a staff member. I guided them to a seat to review their submission.
I suddenly realized that the child's birth date was our wedding anniversary, and a pang of pain shot through my heart. I pressed my nails against my wrist under the counter to suppress my voice.
The woman's name seemed Emma. She's 24, over 10 years younger than David. She appeared like a gentle lady, with a calm demeanor. She was lightly but neatly made up, not looking at all like someone who had just given birth. Nor did she seem like the type to brazenly have an affair with a married man and face his wife.
Perhaps her lack of reaction was because she didn't know about me. It might take some time as we don't want any mistakes.
That's fine. David took the day off, and my parents are looking after my baby in the car. She answered with a smile. She talked about how much she loved her child, and described how the baby was small and birthed healthy. Obviously, David, sitting next to her, couldn't say anything and avoided eye contact with an awkward expression.
He must have found my composed demeanor puzzling. David had been staying away from home, and I had suspected he might have an affair.
But I never imagined he had fathered a child, so I took a deep breath to hide my realization.
If you'd like, please call your parents over. The baby would feel more secure with Mom nearby.
Thank you, I was feeling a bit anxious. I'll do that. Following my suggestion, she started using her mobile phone. David began to panic, but I pretended to check the form and stepped back to the counter.
I prepared the necessary documents and returned with 2 papers.
The couple looked in surprise. Especially Emma, who was visibly shocked. She stared at the unfolded paper, her face turning pale and starting to tremble.
You haven't submitted a marriage registration, have you? We did submit a marriage registration. We are married.
No, that's impossible. On top of the birth notification they had submitted, I placed an unfilled marriage certificate and a divorce form with my name already filled in. I pointed to the blank space for David's on the divorce form.
Could you please fill this in, David? To start a new marital relationship, you first need to get divorced me, right? It seemed they finally understood.
Emma glared at me and then turned a frightening face toward the man next to her. I also looked at David, who had turned pale.
What kind of nerve do you have, submitting the birth notification of a child with your mistress at your wife's counter? Before David couldn't respond to my strong questioning,
Emma stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair with a loud noise. She grabbed at David with a shrill voice.
You deceived me? You said you were single, right? That we would marry because I was pregnant. David!
Of course Emma had no idea he was already married. She had quickly seen through David's cheating personality, and decided to have a child to keep him tied down.
Not knowing he was already married.
David, recently promoted and busy, had told his colleagues.
And he told his clients and colleagues that the fertility treatments had been undergoing. Despite he had no intention of divorcing me, it would ruin everything.
So David had made up various excuses for not submitting the marriage certificate. I have work this weekend, let's skip it, or next time is Emma's dad's birthday, let's prioritize that.
While he was making these excuses, Emma's morning sickness was worsened and leading to hospitalization.
As she was in and out of the hospital, submitting the marriage certificate became the least of their worries. That's why Emma completely believed David's claim that he had already submitted the marriage certificate. There are many things to do after getting married. If one thinks about it calmly, like changing the name on your driver's license and bank accounts.
But Emma, exhausted from her frequent illnesses and the major task of her first childbirth, hadn't considered these things.
Her anger was exploded, and her face turning red with fury.
Wait! What about the money I saved for the wedding? Did you spend it with this person? What? David, you borrowed money too?
I was shocked by Emma's question and hurriedly looked at David.
Don't stay silent, explain. We have a child, you know? You are always so talkative. What about the money? Are you in debt to her? What did you use it for?
David remained silent, not uttering a single word. It appeared that Emma had lent him a significant amount of money.
Of course, none of it had come into our household, and there was no sign that David had been living beyond his salary.
Emma was ignoring the other staff trying to stop her, and shook David for demanding an explanation and repayment. I didn't intervene, because I was considering it was also my concern. My feelings for David had already detached completely.
All right, I get it. You want a divorce, right? Then I'll do it right here, right now. I don't need you anyway. Are you satisfied now?
David, finally enraged and turned his face to red, hastily began to fill out the divorce form.
And Emma, you want your money back, right? You approached me when I started to succeed just because you're the daughter of an executive.
His attack then turned towards Emma, who had been crying silently.
How could he say such things to her, especially after she had borne his child? Just as I thought I should intervene. David caught his breath.
And he was staring intently behind her. I turned to look and saw there, a middle-aged couple with grim expressions was standing at the entrance of the health bureau. The woman was holding a baby and not moving. While the man, who was wearing high-end clothes, approached us with long strides. He seemed to be Emma's father. Emma was crying and rushed to the man who had just arrived. Likely they are her parents whom I had earlier suggested she call. Is what I just heard true? The man's low voice interrogated David, who visibly paled. I heard later that David and Emma had met at a dinner with clients. She was assisting her father, a senior executive, in a secretarial role. David was very taken with Emma's innocence, who had just graduated from college.
You seduced my daughter in a business associate and fathered a child, while being married to another woman? Is that true? I didn't invite you to the dinner to make Emma got to be this.
David was scolded with such fierce anger that he stumbled off his chair and fell to the floor.
Where did the money go that I prepared for the wedding expenses?
David, he was forgetting his defiance, and began to tear up and apologized profusely.
The disappearance of the wedding expenses turns out to be the compensation paid to David, another affair partner.
He was involved with a married woman, but they were quickly discovered, then it led to her divorce. The compensation demanded by the husband was paid off with this money. David fancied young and obedient Emma and knew her family was wealthy, so he thought everything could be managed with their money if a child was involved.
His plan was to settle the affair's compensation and somehow deal with divorcing me, then all that would be left would be a wealthy family-in-law and a loving wife and child. Such a deceitful scheme, trampling over others, could never succeed. I will consult a lawyer about this case of marriage fraud. I'll sue you, and of course, I'll report this to your company. You deceived my daughter. Be prepared. No, please.
Emma's father declared his intention to sue and demand action to David's company. David kept apologizing while crying, but Emma's father left quickly with her and the child. David tried to defend himself, but was restrained by the security guards who arrived due to the commotion, and eventually the police were called.
The filled-out divorce form was left in my hand.
Soon after, David's workplace was informed, and they took swift action. His recent promotion, despite the time elapsed, was revoked, and he was demoted due to his dishonest and problematic behavior. His bad reputation was spread, and endangering several business relationships, then putting his company at risk. David was quickly fired and became unemployed.
The divorce was finalized, and I was free from David.
The house was in his name, so I moved to a distant apartment to avoid overlapping living areas. My family was worried, but as David's misdeeds became known, I received their sympathy and support. Faced with compensations to me, his affair partner, Emma, child support, and a fraud lawsuit, and with his company demanding damages, David quickly fell into financial hardship.
Unbelievably, He thought of reconciling with me and stormed into the health bureau, trying to win me back. I was called out for causing a commotion at the service counter. Probably because I'm the one most likely to listen. But that was back when I was married. Now, I'm divorced. He's a complete stranger to me. Most people at my workplace were aware of the situation. It was embarrassing, but thankfully, after I made it clear, David stopped visiting me, no matter how often he tried. There were several discussions with Emma, too. It was worst that I kept my marriage a secret, but since I caused trouble, she offered to pay compensation. The newborn baby, with the help of both parents, is growing up healthy. So, I was not wanting to disrupt their newfound peace. I declined the money. I told Emma it's far better to use the money for the child's sake, and we parted ways. David couldn't find a new job ever. He looked down on the health department's work, thinking applying for welfare would be easy, but he didn't know about the strict scrutiny for payments. Immediately, his family found out about his misdeeds when they were contacted. His parents, being strict but fair, sent David back home. He ended up doing hard labor as a live-in worker. My transfer to another branch was officially decided because of the commotion caused by David's resentful attacks. It's far enough that the staff there doesn't know about the trouble. It seemed I'd be able to work quietly, and I was being warmly supported and sent off by everyone around me. David would have mocked it as a demotion if he were here. However, my diligent work has been appreciated. It's even better conditions than before. The new life is challenging, but I got a fulfilling job. Finally, a peaceful life without problems is starting.
I'm driving right now. Can you wait?
I called my husband Jarvis, trying to hold back my anger. Jarvis answered the phone with a slightly irritated tone. I pretended to be clueless and started talking in a deliberately cheerful voice.
Driving? But the car is right here. What are you talking about? Oh, are you in this luxurious hotel by any chance? What? What are you talking about? Just so you know, your parents are coming over soon, so be ready.
After saying that, I hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. My name is Roberta. Ever since our daughter Stephanie was born, I've been a housewife. Jarvis and I, married for 10 years, never really fought and lived happily with our daughter. Jarvis is a salesman and often traveled out of state for work. But every time he went on a business trip, he always brought back souvenirs for us.
I'm home, got some souvenirs.
Welcome back. What's the treat today?
Today, it's Stephanie's favorite pudding. Yay! Let's eat it right away.
Life was enjoyable like this, and I often wished for these happy moments to continue. As Stephanie reached her upper elementary years, Jarvis's business trips became more frequent, shifting from once a month to almost every 10 days. Is it normal for business trips to be this frequent? I wondered, but thought. Sales position must be busy, and being busy is good. I didn't worry too much. Jarvis seemed to get busier with work, sometimes even working during his days off.
Working on your day off?
Yeah, I have to. Sorry.
That must be hard. Stephanie will need more money as she grows, so I'm working while I can.
Jarvis always seemed reliable, never showing fatigue despite the frequent business trips. I thought he was a great father. Even though I was concerned about his frequent business trips, I continued to see Jarvis off. I had no idea things would turn out like this. Well, I'm off. I'll probably be back tomorrow night.
Take care, see you soon.
Even though it was Saturday, Jarvis said he had a business trip and left for out of state. His trips were usually overnight and returned late. What should I make for dinner tonight? As I pondered and cleaned the room, I noticed a black file on the living room table. This file, usually used by Jarvis for work, contained documents for clients.
Isn't this something he'd be in trouble if he forgot?
I thought and immediately called Jarvis. But it seemed he didn't notice the call, and he didn't answer. I sent messages in a rush, but got no reply.
If he doesn't have this for sales, won't that be a problem? I waited anxiously for Jarvis to get in touch, but it took him 5 hours to finally call back. Jarvis usually got pretty upset when he made a mistake, but he sounded oddly cheerful on the phone.
Sorry, I was so busy with work I didn't notice. Were you okay without the file?
Yeah, I managed. Luckily, the guy I was with had the documents. When Jarvis said this with a laugh, I felt a sense of discomfort.
Huh? Weren't you supposed to go alone this time?
Oh, suddenly, there was someone who came along. He's a newbie, so we decided to take him to introduce him to the client. You know, the boss sprung it on me out of the blue. It's a bit of a hassle.
I see, that must have been tough. Good job.
At this point, I felt something was off, but I didn't suspect Jarvis of anything shady. The next day, Jarvis returned home past 10 p.m. He usually came home after his business trips these days.
I'm home, totally exhausted. Welcome back. You'll eat dinner, right?
Oh, I already ate.
I'm just gonna shower and go to bed.
After handing me his laundry, Jarvis headed straight to the shower. While putting the clothes in the washing machine, I noticed a long, light-colored hair on Jarvis's shirt. It's longer than mine or Stephanie's.
A woman's hair.
My heart raced, facing something I'd never encountered before. A woman's hair is on a shirt he wore back from a business trip. In dramas or cartoons, such things often lead to the discovery of infidelity, but I thought that couldn't be the case. Jarvis had been on a business trip, and perhaps he was taken to a bar for business socializing. Being taken to a bar by clients is common. Though less frequent now, Jarvis used to often go out for drinks as part of his job in sales. It seemed that maintaining relationships is an important part of sales. And Jarvis, being so earnest, wouldn't cheat. I believed. Still feeling unsettled, I spoke to Jarvis while he was in the shower.
There's a long hair on your shirt.
Jarvis responded calmly. Probably from the hotel. It was a bit old and not well maintained. Maybe it's from a previous guest? Really? That dirty, huh? Jarvis's unflustered response reassured me. If he had something to hide, he would have been more panicked. Seeing Jarvis so normal, I thought he must be fine. Looking back, I regret not being more suspicious then. It could have prevented what happened later. After his shower, Jarvis went to the bedroom as usual, showing no signs of change. However, the next day, I discovered something unbelievable. As I was about to throw out the trash in the laundry room, I noticed something fall from the trash can.
What's this?
Picking it up, I realized it was a restaurant receipt. The unfamiliar restaurant name caught my eye, and I noticed the date was from 2 days ago. That is the date Jarvis was on a business trip, which made me feel strange. The receipt was for 2 people, which made it clear he went there with someone.
A meal with a client, maybe.
That's what I thought, but then I realized something. If it was a business meal, it would be expensed, and he'd need to keep the receipt according to company policy. A mere receipt, thrown away as trash, didn't seem like a business meal.
Then who was he with?
I pondered, staring at the receipt, noticing the time was marked as 10 p.m.
Could Jarvis really be having a dinner with a client after 10 p.m.?
The more I thought about it, the deeper my suspicions grew. Until yesterday, I was convinced of this. Jarvis couldn't possibly be cheating. But putting all the recent events together, I couldn't help but find it suspicious.
Could he be cheating?
For the first time, I began to think like that. Once I started doubting, I wanted to investigate thoroughly. So I decided to hire a detective to look into Jarvis. His frequent business trips seemed dubious, and the woman's hair on his shirt, and him dining late with someone, all bothered me. After hiring the detective, I was told it would take 2 weeks to get the results. Coincidentally, Jarvis had another business trip scheduled in a few days. I informed the detective and left their office. What if all these business trips were lies to meet his mistress? While talking with the detective, I couldn't help but worry.
Okay, I'm off then.
Safe travels. A few days later, Jarvis left for his trip as usual. Since I confronted him about the hair, Jarvis had started locking his mobile phone. He was never concerned about his phone before, but now he even took it to the bathroom. It only increased my suspicions. Is he cheating on me after all? The thought made me both dread and eagerly await the detective's findings. 2 weeks later, when the results were due, I went to the detective's office. The result revealed that Jarvis was having an affair. He was cheating with a woman around his age. Just as I had suspected, he was meeting her under the guise of business trips. It seemed that his increased trips were all for the affair, starting from when it began to increase. The detective provided several photos as evidence. Seeing those photos, I nearly screamed. The woman was my friend Esty. I met her at Stephanie's preschool and we got close due to similar pickup times. We'd visited each other's homes, but I rarely saw Jarvis and Esty talking. Esty moved out of the school district when her child started elementary school due to her husband's job. We lost touch after she moved. Not connecting on social media, so I had no idea what she was doing, but she was close with my husband. The photos showed Esty and Jarvis entering a hotel arm in arm, chatting happily at a cafe, and walking hand in hand in a park, all undeniable evidence of their affair. I was shocked to discover that Jarvis, whom I trusted, was cheating with my friend. The fact that he had an affair with my friend and then acted as if nothing happened around our family was unbelievable. Knowing this truth, I felt it was impossible to continue living with him as a family. The word divorce floated in my mind. Even after returning from the detective's office, I kept thinking about what to do for my family. While I considered divorce, thinking of Stephanie made it hard to decide what was best. Days passed without finding an answer. When I was thinking about weekend plans on Friday, Jarvis made a suggestion. Got any plans for tomorrow?
Tomorrow? No, why?
Well, my parents want to take Stephanie somewhere. Is it okay if she stays overnight? I'll take her, so you can relax, Roberta. Honestly, I appreciated the offer. I didn't want to be with Jarvis, who I just discovered was cheating, and I planned to use the free time to look for a lawyer. Sure. Say hi to your parents for me. So, Jarvis and Stephanie left for his parents' house, and I stayed home to search for a lawyer. The next day, right after breakfast, Jarvis and Stephanie left.
Mom, we're off. Take care, see you later.
After seeing them off, I started searching online for a lawyer experienced in divorce mediation. Reading user reviews, I checked out law firms with good reputations. While researching, I was also messaging Stephanie. An hour had passed since they left. Have you arrived yet? Not yet. Waiting for Dad. Where did Dad go? Don't know. He told me to wait, so I'm reading a book. Finding it odd, I checked Stephanie's mobile phone GPS. Incredibly, it was pointing to a bustling downtown area, completely opposite from his parents' place. Further inspection showed the car parked at a luxury hotel. The GPS location remained static. Could he have left Stephanie in the car and gone into the hotel? I had a bad feeling and immediately called his parents. Hi. Hi, Sharon. It's Roberta. Are Jarvis and Stephanie there? No, they haven't come. We were out visiting graves today. Were they coming over? If they're not there, it's fine. I'll call back later. Shocked by the words of my mother-in-law Sharon, I managed to end the call. Then I called Stephanie, who sounded bored. Dad's not back yet, and I'm bored.
Sorry, honey. Mom's coming to pick you up. Okay. What about Dad?
I'll contact Dad too, don't worry. After assuring Stephanie, I called back his parents. This time my father-in-law Gabe answered. I quickly explained the situation. When I told them Jarvis was cheating and had left Stephanie in the car while at a hotel, they were furious.
What is he thinking, dragging Stephanie into this?
I'm heading to the hotel now. Can you pick up Stephanie?
Sure, we're on our way.
I gave them the hotel's location and left home with the evidence from the detective. The luxury hotel where Jarvis was a 30-minute drive. Arriving at the parking lot, I saw Stephanie innocently waving at me. Seeing her, my anger towards Jarvis grew.
I'm so tired of waiting. Sorry, let's go home first.
Stephanie seemed unaware of the situation, which was a small relief. About 10 minutes later, his parents arrived. After handing Stephanie over to them, I decided to wait for Jarvis.
Okay, Stephanie, let's go eat parfait with Grandma and Grandpa.
Sharon, trying to keep Stephanie from sensing the adults' tense atmosphere, spoke cheerfully. After seeing the in-laws off, I called Jarvis. I'm sure he is in the middle of a very exciting time, so he would surely be irritated if I phoned him. Following a long ring, Jarvis answered annoyingly as I expected.
What now? I'm driving. Can you wait? Driving? But the car's here. What are you talking about? Oh, are you in this luxurious hotel by any chance? What? What are you talking about? Just so you know, your parents are coming here, so be prepared.
Of course, this was a lie. I thought that if I told him his parents were coming, he would surely panic. With that thought, I unilaterally ended the call. As I anticipated, Jarvis hurried out of the hotel within 5 minutes. Obviously having dressed in haste, his shirt buttons were mismatched. Esty, who came out with him, sped off in her car upon seeing me. I had no intention of letting her get away easily. I had planned to give Esty a piece of my mind later on.
Huh? Why are you here? Where's Stephanie? What are you doing, Jarvis? Leaving our daughter in the parking lot for an affair? Unbelievable!
Jarvis, who rarely saw me angry, shrank back. But leaving our daughter alone in a car for an affair, that was unforgivable. I thought it was unbelievable to bring her to a hotel parking lot in the first place.
It's not what you think.
His feeble excuses only exasperated me more.
What do you mean not what I think? Helping her with parenting. That's all. No affair, just talking in the lobby.
As Jarvis stammered, I pulled out an envelope from my bag.
No affair? Then what's this?
I showed him the photos from the detective. Seeing them, Jarvis collapsed to his knees. He seemed to have given up making excuses.
We're going to your parents' house to talk.
I left the parking lot first. Arriving at the in-laws' house, Stephanie had already fallen asleep, maybe because she was tired. No wonder she waited in the car for so long. The sight of her only fueled my anger towards Jarvis. An hour after I arrived, Jarvis showed up. To be so late would indicate that he didn't want to come home. Gabe was waiting, arms crossed, at the entrance. Upon Jarvis's arrival, Gabe lashed out loudly.
What have you done? Say something.
Let's go inside, Sharon suggested, guiding us in. The atmosphere inside was so heavy. Gabe broke the silence.
What were you doing at that hotel?
I was having an affair.
Who with?
A mother of Stephanie's kindergarten friend. Gabe sighed heavily. Then he said quietly,
You're no longer welcome in this house. Don't come back. What do you want to do, Roberta?
Asked by Gabe, I voiced what I had been considering.
I'm thinking of divorce. I won't even let Stephanie see him anymore.
Until yesterday, I was uncertain about divorce, but today's events were decisive. I didn't need a husband who couldn't consider our daughter. That's what I decided.
Divorce? No, not that. You have no right to say anything.
Gabe shouted, silencing Jarvis again. My anger erupted too.
Don't want a divorce? Speak for yourself. Lying about business trips to cheat. I always thought it was odd, going on trips every week.
You were lying like that?
Yes. I went to a detective agency, and they found this evidence.
I showed the in-laws the photos the detective had given me. They sighed heavily, unable to say anything. Jarvis, cornered, started crying. His weeping infuriated me more, and I yelled,
"Why are you crying? I'm the one who should be crying."
Jarvis stayed silent, fighting back tears. I took out the divorce papers I had prepared and had him fill them out on the spot. We agreed on the terms for the divorce settlement. "I'll file these tomorrow. Can you pack your things and leave?" "Understood." Jarvis left to collect his belongings. We stayed with the in-laws for a few days, just to be safe. They were concerned about Stephanie and me. "Roberta, if Jarvis stops paying, we'll cover the divorce settlement."
"I can't accept that."
"It's fine. Jarvis has caused enough trouble. Will you accept it?" "Thank you." With the in-laws' help, we received the entire divorce settlement up front. It was a relief for me, transitioning to a single-parent household. Jarvis moved out, leaving Stephanie and me to our new life. We received a substantial divorce settlement from Jarvis and Esty, bringing a sense of closure. If anything happens, we can rely on my parents, and the in-laws are willing to help too. Although I no longer have a relationship with Jarvis, I still have a relationship with my in-laws and often visit them. Stephanie loves her grandparents and frequently wants to stay over. I found out later that Esty was infamous among friends for pursuing married men. She has had a number of troubles in the past. Because of my divorce settlement claim, her husband found out about her affair with Jarvis and they ended up divorcing too. Jarvis got involved with a bar staff and apparently is spending a lot of money there. Stephanie and I are enjoying our freedom, living happily as a duo.